Of course, here's your rewritten and expanded version of the story, fully reworded to avoid headings and quotations, and naturally expanded to about 1,600 words. I preserved the narrative's tone and dramatic pacing while enriching the atmosphere, character psychology, and sensory details for depth and realism. The aisle of the base exchange was quiet, except for the soft hum of fluorescent lights and the distant shuffle of carts. A voice suddenly sliced through the calm, sharp and edged with the kind of confidence that came only from inexperience. A man in a crisp navy uniform stood at the end of the row, his polished shoes catching the light, his rank insignia gleaming like tiny suns. Lieutenant Commander Price was his name, a man whose career had been built on immaculate appearance and unyielding ambition. He stood with his hands fixed on his hips, his posture radiating irritation as he stared down an old man examining a can of soup. The older man, dressed in jeans faded by time and a cap that bore the emblem of the Navy long past, moved slowly and deliberately. His fingers trembled faintly from age, but when he finally lifted his gaze, his eyes were startlingly clear, gray-blue and steady, the kind of eyes that had seen the world at its worst and still found peace in it. He looked neither startled nor submissive, merely observant, and this calm composure seemed to fuel Price's growing impatience. The younger man demanded to know what was taking so long, pointing out that this was a base exchange, not a library. He spoke with a tone that suggested he believed his words carried the full weight of the Navy itself. The older man, whose name was Silas Kane, placed the can of soup back on the shelf with deliberate care. His voice was low and measured when he finally replied, offering a soft apology. There was no defensiveness in him, only quiet courtesy. Yet something in his stillness felt like defiance, a calm refusal to play the part of the intimidated civilian that Price clearly wanted him to be. Price, feeling this unspoken resistance, stiffened. His promotion to lieutenant commander was recent, and it had inflated his sense of authority. He saw potential disrespect in every corner, challenges to his control that he felt compelled to stamp out. The old man in front of him, he decided, would not escape correction. He made a cutting remark about the triviality of picking out soup as though it were a matter of national strategy, and demanded to know what business Silas had there. The exchange, he reminded, was for active duty personnel and their families, not for relics of a bygone era to wander through. He flicked his hand dismissively toward the veteran's cap, making an offhand comment about how service from half a century ago didn't grant special privileges. Silas adjusted the brim of his cap, the motion unhurried, his tone unshaken. He explained that he had the necessary identification to be there. That calm composure was infuriating to Price, who could not understand how a man so old and plain could maintain such quiet confidence in the face of his authority. A few shoppers had begun to notice the scene. They lingered nearby, feigning interest in cereal boxes or detergent, their attention drawn to the officer's sharp tone and the old man's gentle steadiness. Sensing eyes upon him, Price straightened, performing now as much for his audience as for his own pride. He demanded to see identification. Silas sighed faintly, a sound that carried the weight of long patience, and reached into his pocket for his wallet. He withdrew a veteran identification card, edges worn but still valid, and handed it over without hesitation. Price snatched it away, scanning it as if he expected to uncover a forgery, though the document was in perfect order. Finding nothing amiss, he flicked it back at Silas, his disdain undisguised. He muttered about veterans clinging to faded glory, mocking the idea that an old man in a cap could have ever done anything of consequence. His tone dropped, crueler now, as he speculated on what kind of job Silas must have done. Some menial task, perhaps kitchen duty or paperwork, far removed from the real danger of war. The insult was designed to provoke, to strip away dignity, but Silas remained silent. His expression did not shift, only a faint shadow passed behind his eyes, a flash of something tired and ancient. He had seen this type before, young men who confused position with wisdom, who mistook loudness for strength. He had met them in boot camps, on ships, and sometimes in places where arrogance had gotten people killed. Without another word, he put his wallet away and turned to leave, deciding the soup and the trouble weren't worth the same aisle. But Price wasn't done. He stepped forward, barring the exit, declaring that he was giving a direct order for the old man to leave the exchange and never return. The quiet tension in the aisle deepened. A man in uniform at the far end, a broad-shouldered Master Chief named Davies, had been watching from the moment Price raised his voice. With 25 years in service, Davies had learned to recognize when a situation was about to cross a dangerous line. He'd seen officers like Price before, young, decorated, and painfully unaware of their own fragility. He approached with the calm of a man who didn't need to prove anything. His voice was even when he addressed the lieutenant commander, asking if there was a problem that required assistance. Price, still flushed with authority, replied that it was handled and that the old man had been ordered off base. Davies's eyes shifted to Silas, and what he saw wasn't a troublemaker, but a man carrying decades of dignity and silence. He suggested that perhaps the situation could be eased, that no harm was being done now. But Price, threatened by the hint of contradiction, bristled. He reminded the Master Chief who outranked whom and made it clear that his order was final. Before the argument could deepen, the air in the room seemed to change. A quiet fell across the aisles as shoppers straightened and stepped aside. The base commander, Admiral Thompson, entered, his presence alone commanding silence. A tall man with gray at his temples and eyes like steel beneath a storm, the Admiral needed no introduction. His gaze swept the scene. An angry junior officer, a calm old veteran, a watching crowd, and a Master Chief caught between them. He understood everything in seconds. Price's confidence crumbled. He snapped to attention, his salute sharp but trembling. The Admiral's expression didn't change as he walked past him, moving directly toward the old man. His eyes studied Silas closely, the lines on his face, the worn cap, the quiet posture that carried the weight of long experience. There was something hauntingly familiar about him, something that reached back decades into the hidden corners of naval history. The Admiral addressed him directly, his tone respectful, free of condescension. He apologized for the officer's conduct, stating that such behavior did not represent the standards of the service. Price felt the words hit him like a blow. The Admiral wasn't even acknowledging him. All attention was on the old man, who stood quietly as though this sort of thing was nothing new. When the Admiral asked his name and his unit, Silas replied simply that he had served with the underwater demolition teams before they became what the world now knew as the Navy SEALs. Davies, the Master Chief, froze in stunned respect. The Admiral's expression shifted, recognition dawning in his eyes. He knew those teams. He knew their history, their impossible missions, the quiet heroics that had shaped naval warfare. He studied Silas again, disbelief mingling with reverence, and finally asked one more question, almost in a whisper. Did the man have a call sign? Silas hesitated for a long moment, his gaze distant, as though he was peering through time. Then he looked the Admiral in the eye and spoke two words that changed the entire atmosphere of the exchange. Ghost 5. The name fell like a thunderclap in a church. To most of the people there, it meant nothing. But to Admiral Thompson, it was as if he had just seen a spirit from legend step out of the past. His face drained of color, and his hand trembled slightly as he took a step back. The young aide beside him gasped audibly. Master Chief Davies's eyes widened in disbelief. Ghost 5 was a myth told to every special operations recruit, a name whispered in training halls as a story of endurance. Sacrifice and impossible survival. Price, bewildered, stammered a question, asking what the name meant. The Admiral turned toward him slowly, and the look in his eyes froze the younger man where he stood. When the Admiral spoke, his tone was quiet but cutting, a blade honed by fury and grief. He explained that Ghost Team had been a classified 5-man SEAL element sent behind enemy lines during a black operation in 1968. Their mission had been to destroy a Soviet guidance system deep within enemy territory. The insertion was compromised. 4 of the 5 men were killed almost immediately. Only one survived, the one they later believed had perished after completing the mission alone. That survivor was Ghost 5. For 23 days, the Admiral said, the man had remained deep behind enemy lines, hunted by elite Soviet forces. Despite being wounded and alone, he completed the mission, destroyed the target, and then trekked 200 miles across frozen terrain to reach safety. His file had been sealed under top-level classification. Officially, he had died a hero. The story of Ghost 5 was used to inspire generations of sailors, to show the unbreakable limits of courage. And now, that legend was standing in the commissary, calmly holding a can of soup. The Admiral's voice faltered as he spoke, overcome by awe. He turned to Silas with tears in his eyes, explaining that his Medal of Honor citation was locked away in the Pentagon because the mission remained classified. What Price had done, he said, wasn't just disrespectful. It was an act of ignorance toward a living monument. The truth hit Price like a physical impact. His throat went dry and his chest constricted. All the arrogance that had seemed so natural only moments ago curdled into humiliation. He had mocked a man whose courage dwarfed anything he would ever know. Around them, the onlookers stood in reverent silence, their earlier curiosity replaced with solemn respect. They were no longer witnesses to a confrontation. They were witnessing the unveiling of a legend. The Admiral, regaining composure, turned to Master Chief Davies and ordered him to escort Silas to his personal office. He was to be treated as an honored guest, provided coffee and comfort, whatever he required. Davies nodded, emotion thick in his throat, and approached Silas, not to guide him, but to walk beside him, as one sailor to another. As the two men departed, the Admiral faced Price again. His voice dropped to a deadly calm. The young officer would remain where he stood, then report to the legal office, surrender his command, and await review. But the Admiral's punishment went further. Price would spend the next year working at the Naval History and Heritage Command, archiving the stories of men like Silas Kane. He would study their names, their missions, their sacrifices. He would learn what it truly meant to wear the uniform he had disgraced. Silas paused as he passed the trembling lieutenant commander. His eyes were gentle, not angry. He told the Admiral that the boy would learn, given time. Then he walked away, a quiet figure moving through the echoing aisles, leaving behind a silence that would linger long after he was gone. The story would spread through the base, whispered with reverence, a tale of pride humbled, of forgotten valor rediscovered. And Lieutenant Commander Price, left standing amid the murmuring hum of the exchange, finally understood that he had not been confronted by an old man that day, but by the living embodiment of the Navy's soul. For the first time in his life, he felt what it meant to be small in the shadow of true greatness.